Ever watched someone completely shift a room's energy without uttering a single word? They don't argue, they don't plead, they just step back. And suddenly, everything around them transforms. The atmosphere changes, questions arise. People start chasing what they can no longer easily reach. What if you wielded that same ability? What if instead of jumping at every provocation, you chose quiet over constant response, retreat over reaction? Here's what would unfold. The moment you stop being perpetually accessible, emotionally, mentally, physically, the people around you start to scramble. Why? Because they've grown accustomed to pulling your strings, your reactions, your predictability, your availability. But the instant you withdraw, the entire dynamic shifts. Those who assumed they had you figured out suddenly realize they don't know you at all. Jung once observed that what irritates us in others often mirrors something within ourselves. So ask yourself this: when you become unreachable, who actually panics? Who gets agitated? Who pokes and prods trying to drag a response from you? Their behavior reveals far more about them than it does about you. It exposes how you've been emotionally maneuvered without even recognizing it. You've been giving yourself away to keep the peace, to make others comfortable, to hold on to people who were never truly yours to begin with. Every forced agreement, every instant reply, every emotional outburst hands over a piece of your inner reserves. By day's end, what remains? Exhaustion, frustration, an emptiness with no clear source. Let me tell you why. You're far too accessible to people who don't deserve even a moment of your considered silence. This isn't about rejecting everyone around you. This is about selecting yourself first. It's about understanding what Jung described as individuation, the journey toward becoming complete and authentic on your own terms. That journey starts when you grasp that silence can overpower 1,000 explanations. That withdrawal, when rooted in self-awareness rather than avoidance, becomes an act of genuine authority. So let me ask you directly, how much longer will you let other people's emotions dictate your responses? How much longer will you dance like a marionette every time someone tugs at your weak spots? Perhaps it's time to sever those strings, to pull back, to become something they can't quite decode. Because when you stop being constantly available, the entire game transforms. You've been trained since childhood to always show up, to reply fast, to accommodate, to nod yes even when everything in you screams no. You've been taught that your value depends on how accessible you make yourself to others. But here's something nobody probably told you with this kind of clarity. Excessive availability isn't a strength, it's a cage. As long as you believe you must be reachable at all times, emotionally or otherwise, you'll be drained, controlled, and discarded the second you stop being useful. Want to know why? Because constant availability makes you predictable. And anything predictable becomes a tool. People start treating you like an emotional vending machine. They hit the button when they need comfort, validation, or distraction, then shelf you until the next time they're running low. You don't see it happening because you're trapped in the belief that being present for everyone will guarantee someone's presence for you. But that's not how it works. Jung talked about the persona, the mask we wear to gain acceptance and love. It's precisely this mask that keeps you overly available. You say you're fine when you're drowning. You answer texts instantly, even when you're completely drained. You explain justify, and defend yourself as if the world holds some claim over you. The reality? The more you center yourself in other people's stories, the more you vanish from your own. Being perpetually available is a subtle betrayal of yourself. It's approval-seeking in disguise, rejection avoidance dressed up as kindness, an attempt to control how others perceive you. But this control comes with a cost. The price is your peace, your vital energy scattered like it's infinite when it's actually very, very finite. People demanding your constant availability don't actually want you. They want what you provide: validation, company, distraction, emotional relief. But when you shift, when you establish boundaries, when you refuse to react on command, these same people turn hostile. They call you distant, changed, difficult, not because you've actually become those things, but because you've stopped functioning as their emotional appliance. Here's the cruelest part. The more available you make yourself, the less others value you. What's abundant becomes disposable. Nobody respects what they never had to earn. Nobody treasures what's always just sitting there waiting. So pause for a moment. Who actually deserves your time, your attention, your presence, your energy? Better yet, who deserves your absence? Before you answer, we need to understand something crucial. Why do we react so automatically? Why do we give in so easily? What drives this almost compulsive need to respond, explain, and please? The answer sits in what Jung called psychic energy. That's what we're diving into next, because your energy is all you truly possess. If you don't learn to guard it, someone else will use it against you. If this resonates with you, hit that subscribe button. Your support means everything. Jung didn't view the human mind as some automatic response machine. For him, our psyche operates as an energy system. Every thought, every emotion, every action consumes a portion of that energy. The real question: are you directing where your energy flows, or are you letting the world decide for you? Every impulsive reaction drains psychic energy. When you defend yourself against criticism that didn't warrant attention, when you rise to obvious bait just to prove you're right, when you dive into pointless arguments, when you scramble to please people who don't value you, you're burning your inner resources on things that offer zero nourishment. Jung was explicit. What you resist persists. The more you react, the tighter the chains. People living in emotional exhaustion aren't weak, they're misdirected. And you know what happens to someone running on empty? They become vulnerable. Easy prey. Manipulative, opportunistic, emotionally parasitic people can smell this. They recognize when you don't know how to protect your energy, when you react to everything, when you're constantly trying to fix everyone else's problems. And they exploit it. Jung taught that a healthy psyche maintains energy within its own system. That means knowing how to refuse without guilt, how to stay silent without feeling cowardly, how to observe before you act. Real power isn't found in reacting. It's in choosing when and how to engage. And that only becomes possible when you know yourself well enough to recognize your own triggers. How many nights have you lost to an unresolved conversation running circles in your head? How many hours have you spent replaying what you should have said, or trying to decode why someone treated you poorly? That's energy leaking out with nothing flowing back. You're keeping ghosts alive that should have been buried long ago, feeding dynamics that only exist because you insist on engaging. Psychic energy functions like a force field. When properly guarded, it creates presence. You walk into a space and command respect without speaking. When poorly managed, you become invisible, reactive, fragile, and the world shows no mercy to those who cave easily. Start tracking your triggers, what makes you react automatically, what throws you off center. Those are exactly the points where your energy escapes, and that's where your work begins. Not to become cold or detached, but to become selective, sovereign over your own responses. Here's one of Jung's deepest insights. When you conserve your energy, you shatter the projections others have placed on you, and that disturbs people immensely. We're now entering darker territory, the realm of quiet manipulation. In the next section, we'll explore how opportunistic people feed off your energy and why your unavailability completely dismantles their games. Get ready to see clearly the people who've been draining you all along. You think you're in control. You believe your reactions are conscious decisions. But the truth cuts deeper. Most of your emotional responses are programmed, and people who understand this manipulate you effortlessly. Opportunistic individuals don't need to yell, threaten, or force anything. They just press the buttons you've left exposed, and you react every single time. Jung called this projection, people projecting onto others what they can't acknowledge in themselves. But there's another layer most miss. While others project onto you, you become the screen for these images. The more emotionally available you are, the more you become a blank canvas for whatever they need you to be. That friend who only calls during their crises, that partner who constantly needs rescuing, that person who praises you, but only while you're useful. None of this is accidental. They're not connecting with you. They're connecting with the idea of you, the role you've agreed to perform. Why do you agree? Fear. Fear of disappointing people. Fear of losing love. Fear of abandonment. The most effective manipulation doesn't happen through shouting. It happens through the whisper of guilt. When you feel you owe something, when you believe you must be available, must help, must understand, even as it destroys you from the inside. Here's the core truth. Manipulators don't need to control you directly. They just need you to keep reacting the same way. But when you stop reacting, the game collapses. When you start refusing, responding with silence, withdrawing instead of explaining, the projections crumble. The mask they placed on you falls away. This unsettles people because they no longer recognize you. And worse, they're now forced to confront themselves. Not everyone's ready for that. Your unavailability threatens them because it forces them to face their own internal void. The silence you offer reveals the noise they don't want to hear. Then comes the backlash, criticism, emotional theatrics, accusations, not because you're wrong, but because you've stopped serving as their convenient mirror. Jung said we don't become enlightened by imagining light, but by making our darkness conscious. When you withdraw, when you stop feeding the cycle, other people's shadows start emerging. And for those who've always used you as their escape route, this is unbearable. But what about you? Are you prepared for the discomfort of being misunderstood, rejected, even attacked for protecting yourself? Are you ready to endure the silence that follows the break? Because within that silence, a different kind of power is born. That's what comes next. You're about to understand why silence can be the most devastating force in the human psyche, and how it completely rewrites the dynamic between you and everyone around you. The modern world is drowning in noise. Everyone's fighting to be heard, to respond instantly, to win meaningless debates and prove their point, even if it costs them their sanity. But there exists a power few recognize, and even fewer master. The power of silence, not passive silence, not cowardly silence, conscious, strategic, devastatingly clear silence, the kind that isn't absence, but amplified presence. Jung understood silence not as emptiness, but as fertile ground for inner transformation. When you stop reacting, you start observing. Through observation, you spot patterns previously invisible. Emotional loops, manipulation tactics, self-sabotage cycles. Silence creates lucidity, and lucidity is dangerous to anyone trying to control you. Notice how certain people panic when you don't respond, when you don't explain yourself, when you simply vanish. It's not because they miss you. It's because your silence strips away their narrative control. While you're talking, you're still playing their game. When you're silent, you've changed the rules entirely, and that destabilizes anyone who thrives on your reactions. True silence isn't voicelessness. It's mastery over your own energy. It's refusing to be pulled into someone else's emotional chaos. It's the conscious choice not to fight battles that don't deserve your wear and tear. Jung taught that individuation requires this distance, because only in silence can you hear yourself without the world's interference. But don't fool yourself. Silence has a cost. It will separate you from people who only valued the role you played. It will make you incomprehensible to those who only saw you through their own needs. It will make you seem cold, distant, arrogant even. But all of that is just the reaction of people who never wanted to deal with your depth, only your utility. Hard truth, the more you mature, the more selective you become with your words, because you understand each sentence is an energetic investment. Not everyone deserves access to your truth. Sometimes silence isn't retreat, it's sovereignty. It's the language of people who no longer need to prove anything to anyone. Silence makes people uncomfortable because it forces them to sit with their own thoughts, their own internal noise. That discomfort reveals more about them than any argument could. You don't need to explain your absence. It explains itself. Those who feel threatened by it reveal how much they depended on your imbalance to maintain their own sense of control. But the most powerful silence isn't the kind that disturbs others. It's the silence that reconstructs you from within. The silence connecting you to something beyond external approval. In that internal space, free from others' demands, you begin recovering your vital energy and reconnecting with your essence. That's what we're exploring next, because cutting out external noise isn't enough. You need to relearn how to use your energy consciously, to choose where it goes, where it stays, and most importantly, where it should never be wasted again. It's time to become selective with your own soul. Understanding all this intellectually means nothing if you keep saying yes when you mean no, replying to messages that drain you, participating in hollow conversations, maintaining relationships that only exist out of habit. Awareness without action is just sophisticated self-deception. Real transformation begins when you make the firm decision to become selective. And that requires emotional discipline. Conscious unavailability isn't about being cold, arrogant, or indifferent. It's about refusing to be accessible to anyone, at any time, for any reason. It's reclaiming control over your energy, your time, your peace. This starts with small moves, not replying instantly, breathing before reacting, leaving an argument before it drags you under, turning off your phone without guilt, saying not today, saying I'm not interested, saying I won't get involved. But here's what matters most. You don't need to justify your absence. You don't need to explain your silence. You owe nothing to anyone except yourself. For many people, this is unforgivable. When you refuse to explain yourself, you remove their power to keep you locked in an emotional narrative where you're always the helpful one, the understanding one, the accessible one. Jung understood that every individuation process involves isolation, not depressive isolation, but sacred isolation. A period of inner retreat where you relearn to hear your own voice without the world screaming over it. Where you rebuild your identity, not based on others' opinions, but from your own center. Want a reliable gauge of your growth? Watch who distances themselves when you become more reserved. Watch who tries provoking you when you stop reacting. Watch who accuses you of changing when you finally start protecting yourself. These aren't signs you're doing something wrong. They're proof you've begun breaking free. Being unavailable feels uncomfortable at first. You'll feel guilty. You'll think you're being selfish. You'll hear you're being too harsh. But this is part of the deconstruction. You've spent your entire life conditioned to put yourself second. Of course, change creates discomfort, not just in you, but in everyone who benefited from your old version. Conscious unavailability is the foundation of self-determination. When you say no to the world, you say yes to yourself. When you exit a toxic environment, you're affirming that your peace matters more than any fake connection. When you stop explaining yourself, you start being respected, even if only by a few. Not everyone's ready for this kind of presence, because your emotional absence will expose wounds they don't want to face. It'll reveal how much they relied on your emotional chaos to feel in control. That's when the rupture happens. With rupture comes pain, loneliness, estrangement, the sensation that you're losing something when you're actually just liberating yourself. But what comes after? What emerges from the silence? In this final section, we're talking about the rebirth that only happens when you have the courage to be misunderstood, to be alone, to become whole on your own terms. It's time to understand why the loneliness of the strong is the pathway to true freedom. When you stop being available to everyone, something profound unfolds. First comes silence, uncomfortable silence that seems to echo through you. You wonder if you made the right call, if you're being too extreme, if you're losing people who cared about you. But gradually, that silence transforms. It starts to cleanse, to calm, to heal. Then comes solitude. Not the solitude of emptiness, the solitude of complete presence with yourself, the solitude of the strong, the solitude of someone who no longer betrays themselves to keep others around. In that space where confusion once lived, clarity moves in. Where anxiety used to be, peace arrives. Where neediness once dominated, a new strength emerges. The strength of being whole within yourself. Jung said the individuation process, becoming who you really are, requires distancing from the collective, removing the mask, walking alone for a while. That's exactly what you're doing when you choose unavailability. You're not running from the world, You're returning to yourself. This is where you stop being a reactor and become a creator. You stop being shaped by circumstances and start shaping your reality from the inside out. The people uncomfortable with your absence reveal they never wanted you. They wanted the function you served. Now that you no longer fit that role, they don't know what to do with you. And that's liberating. You'll lose people, but you'll find yourself. You'll distance from certain places, but you'll reconnect with your essence. You'll be misunderstood, but finally, you'll start being respected. Because when you're no longer available for everything, you become valuable. Rare, unforgettable. This is rebirth, a new beginning, the start of a life where you're no longer available for emotional scraps, for mind games, for emptiness disguised as connection. Now you only accept what resonates with your peace, your truth, your wholeness. If you've made it this far, part of you is already ready for this path. Part of you already understands that being loved means nothing if it requires abandoning yourself. That real self-love begins when you choose yourself, even if it means being alone for a while. If this message hit home, write in the comments, "I choose my peace." See you there.